We often think of peace as the absence of war, that if powerful countries just would reduce their weapon arsenals, we could have peace. But if we look deeply into the weapons, we see our own minds, our own prejudices, fears, and ignorance. Even if we transport all the bombs to the moon, the roots of war and the roots of bombs are still there in our hearts and in our minds. And sooner or later, we will make new bombs. All right. Welcome to what was another morning episode of the Liberty Dad podcast, a discussion on politics and culture. If you caught the stream this morning, which is when I normally produce the show, you know I had a bit of a mishap with my little guy. Today just wasn't his day, at least the morning wasn't. And the show got cut short so that I could help him work it out. At any rate, I'm back this afternoon to finish what I started, and I do appreciate you tuning in, whether it was this morning or whether it is now or whether it is later. Nonetheless, we will do our best here to make sure that you get a stream to watch. So, today, random dad musings. What's going on? Well, you might have noticed there was an absence. I was not here Sunday night. I was not here Monday, and I was not here Tuesday. Like, what in the heck happened, DL? What's going on here? Well, as it turns out, Saturday was my wife's birthday, and we had a bit of an emergency. We ended up in in the emergency room with a family member. Don't worry, everything is good. We're all good. We're not going to get into the details, but suffice it to say, it ended up being just a scare. Otherwise, no issues. So good for that. But it did mess up the whole weekend because we were like in the ER for like 4 hours or something like that. So it kind of messed up the whole weekend. I ended up not doing the show on Sunday night, and then that kind of bled over because we generally have a very packed schedule of things that we're doing, and so then like all these things didn't get done, and we were trying to accomplish certain things in specific to her birthday. So it ended up that I kind of got thrown off my game, and we're back. And then of course I came back this morning to try to rekindle that game, if you will, and then my little guy had a little bit of a breakdown. But no worries, that's all in a day's work with the Liberty Dad podcast. Family first. That's how we roll. Here we are. So, what are we going to talk about today? Well, I got a few clips that I want to show you, and then I'll tie them in at the end to the comment that to the quote that I started this show out with. So, first thing is let's pull this up. This is you might be familiar with Zuby. Zuby is a he's like a rapper, he's a speaker, and he travels around internationally, he's a podcast host. So he was recently on the Pierce Morgan show. And this is what Pierce Morgan tweeted out. He tweeted out freedom of speech. Well, he's quoting Zuby. He said freedom of speech specifically exists to protect views and people espousing views that you disagree with. And then the rest of the tweet says Zuby tells Pierce Morgan he thinks white supremacist Nick Fuentes should be allowed back on X. Now, if you're not familiar with why this conversation is even happening, it's happening because recently on X, Elon Musk had put out a poll, and he decided eventually to let Alex Jones back on Twitter or X. And so there's a big, huge discussion like, should they be allowed? What about the things that they say? Alex Jones had said some terrible things. Nick Fuentes, if you're not familiar with Nick Fuentes, he's not a white, at least to my knowledge, I don't know too much about him, but he's not a white supremacist in the variant of like, the guy that you see who's, got the shaved head and he's wearing jeans and a white t-shirt and maybe suspenders and boots. Like he's not that level of white supremacist. Like he'll wear a tie and he has a show and he talks, speaking with proper grammar. He doesn't really use a whole lot of slang, at least not that I'm aware of. And so he kind of presents himself a little bit more formal. Okay. But I think at the end of the day, he still has a lot of these white supremacist views or something along that line. Now, I don't think he identifies specifically as a white supremacist, but I think when you look at some of his ideas, he is very much in line with, you know, some white supremacist ideas. And we're not talking about, again, we're not talking about the violent ones. We're talking about maybe the more subtle ones. So anyway, here's what Zuby had to say about that. And let's go ahead and pull this up on the screen here, so that you can see it.
I think if
All right, hold on. I got to get it up on the screen, nice and big so that you can see it. So there we are. Awesome. There's Zuby and there is Pierce Morgan. So let's hear what Zuby has to say.
I think if X is going to be a free speech platform, it needs to be a free speech platform.
Would you let Nick Fuentes back on?
Yes.
Really? A white supremacist anti-Semite?
Yeah, as long as he doesn't break the rules.
Well, those are breaking the rules.
No, having views, having thoughts in your head is not against the law.
What about
or
saying
breaking the rules
on his show?
If you say things on the platform that violate the platform,
And if you
rules,
promote your show and you say them on your show?
well,
if I started spewing white supremacist stuff now
I
in
think
front of you, right, and I then tweeted
Yes.
a link to the show, you'd be
Mhm.
happy with that?
I'm not saying I would be happy with it, but I wouldn't want you banned from X for that.
Really? So I could look down the barrel of this camera and say, I think all black people should be thrown out of this country.
Watch how they clip this one.
Well, no, okay. So then someone will clip it, right? And I could say that,
Yes.
and then I could tweet a link to this show to promote the show,
Yes.
and you would think I should stay on X.
Yes. I would support your right to free speech.
Wow.
Crazy, right? Like it's kind of hard to imagine, I guess, if you're Pierce Morgan, why would somebody be like that? What is going on in Zuby's mind? So I'm not really going to try to speak for Zuby, but I'm going to give you my perspective, my musing, if you will, on this. The idea of free speech is more than just government. Like the government has a limit, because that's what we do. We put a limit on what government can impose upon the people. But the one of the reasons that we put a limit on speech, specifically with the government, is because more speech is better. So I want you to think of it this way. Imagine that you have more speech, or you have an alternative version where you have less speech. More speech can get out of hand, but that allows anybody to come up with any argument. And the value is that if you, let's just say it's you that's saying something, you say something unpleasant, I can come along and I can say, okay, well, here's why that's a terrible idea. Okay. But now we go to the alternative. The alternative is where we limit speech. Well, the problem is if you limit what I can say, then I find some other way to say it. It's kind of like when we were kids. Remember, you weren't allowed to say a particular swear word. So you would say some other word, that meant the swear word, something like that. And then all your friends knew what you were talking about. So you kind of talked in code. Like that's what people do. People will say what they want to say and they will find clever ways to say it. So number one, you're not really going to stop them. But number two, for those who you do stop, then what you haven't addressed the core issue. You haven't addressed what's deep inside. And the way that you address those things is not by silencing them, but by allowing others to come up in their minds with the clever responses that are necessary to combat these bad ideas. It's really as simple as more free speech is better than less free speech, because less free speech is simply a race to the bottom. Some people will find their way to get around, whatever limitations that you impose upon them. But the real question here is, why is it a race to the bottom? Because think about what I just said. We will find ways to say what we want to say. So if you limit me and you say, well, you can't say this word or you can't say this thing, then I will find a way to reference that thing so that you don't know about it. But eventually you're going to know about it. And then you're going to be like, oh, now he's using this other word. So if we don't say the F word, we might say fudge. Well, then you might realize, hey, in certain contexts, when he says fudge, what he really means is the F word. So then what you might do is, because you're trying to get me to not say the F word, then you would say, well, now you can't say the word fudge. Okay, great. So now I can't say the F word. I can't say fudge. So then what I do is I find some other clever way to say or reference what I really want to say. Eventually, you're going to find that too. And then you're going to limit that, and it's going to continue on in this perpetual cycle for which you will have never stopped me inside thinking that I want to say a certain thing. So therefore, one, you can't stop it. And then number two, in your attempts to stop it, you have to keep encroaching more and more and more. But it even goes to where, let's say that you get a large portion of the people to at least stop saying it. And maybe they don't engage in some of the theatrics of trying to say something without saying it, right? Well, then what happens is nothing, right? Like people aren't saying the word. So you sounds like you accomplished something. But then you look further and you're like, well, maybe people should not say this either. Maybe people should not say this. And so then it becomes so one way or another, you are continually adding to the list of limits upon the people. But the limits don't work. Right. And if you remember the quote at the very beginning here, right? He's talking about war, but this really goes with any idea in reality. If you look deep enough, you find that these things, these words, these ideas, they're in our minds, they're our own prejudices, our own fears, our own ignorance. Because here's what he said. Here's what Thich Nhat Hanh, it's weird, it's an odd name, but the monk, the peace activist, the poet, the teacher that I quoted at the beginning of the show, he said, "We often think of peace as the absence of war, that if powerful countries would reduce their weapon arsenals, we could have peace. But if we look deeply into the weapons, we see our own minds, our own prejudices, fears, and ignorance." So if I can try to reword that on the fly, we often think of politeness as the absence of profanity, right? Just for example, that if people would reduce their use of profanity, we could just have more politeness. But if we look deep inside the profanity, we see our own minds, our own prejudices, fears, and ignorance. Now I'm just kind of making this up on the fly. And it's not necessarily that I think that profanities have all of those necessarily. They might. But the idea is if when you're talking about speech that we don't like, it does have those things. It has prejudices and fears and ignorance that underlie it. So the way that we get past those is to address them. You can't address them if they're not on the table. Now, I want to show you another clip of something here. This is going to make a little bit of fun of uh of that Nick Fuentes, because you might be like, well, who is this Nick Fuentes guy anyway? And so I'm going to show you, because a lot of people, I'm just going to show you this clip of something. And a lot of people, they tend to think of him as, promoting hate and all these scary ideas, and he's dangerous and all this kind of stuff. And just want to show you something just to kind of mock the guy a little bit. So I don't know where this video comes from, and I don't know who the other guy I don't know. I only know who Nick Fuentes is. So let me pull this up on the screen here. All right, there we go. And you can see there are two gentlemen. They look like they're in a tussle, right? And the guy on the right is Nick Fuentes. He's got the sunglasses on. He's got the black leather jacket. So I want to play this clip here real quick. There is a little bit of profanity, so bear with me, folks. But let's play this clip real fast. All right. So I want you to watch. Okay, so they're having a kind of a
Don't fucking touch him. Stop.
okay.
Yeah, look, sure. Just fucking stop.
All right.
You just want.
All right. That was enough of that. Did you see what happened there? Like, roll this back a little bit. Yeah. This, these guys. This is their fight. Okay, this is the guy that people get worried about. Okay, they freak out about this guy. Like, look at this is, and I've seen people on the internet refer to this as a street fight. So look, just let me tell you, look, I'm not going to claim to be something I'm not, but I've run the streets a little bit when I was younger. This ain't no street fight. I can assure you. I'm not even sure what this is exactly, other than something that we don't have to worry about. So that's this Nick Fuentes guy that people kind of flip out about. And they're like, oh my gosh, Nick Fuentes. No, that's who he is. And that's why don't think we really need to be too worried about him. Now, as far as the speech goes, the best way to handle whatever he says that may be bigoted or incite people is for people like me to have access to those words. So the more you put him and others on X, the more I see it and the more I'll comment on it, right? And maybe not all the time, but sometimes, sometime I'll go, okay, that's just nonsense. And then I'll respond and others might as well. And then we have this opportunity to basically beat down bad ideas with good ideas. You can think of it as the how do they say that with the guns? The best response to a bad guy with a gun is a good guy with a gun. The best response to a bad idea is a good idea. But in this particular case, in order for a good idea to spring about, we have to have access to the bad idea. And if we shove people into the deep corners of places, then only those who happen to be there will have access to these words. And so then these ideas will fester and they'll grow and they could become something dangerous, right? Ideas get beat down when good people have access to them. And I consider myself good. I don't know if Nick Fuentes is a bad guy or just has bad ideas. I can tell you he can't fight. That's for sure. Okay. I saw that fight and I'm like, dude, seriously don't. And I saw some dudes talking like he got in a street fight. And I'm like, okay, if you call that a street fight, stay in your hotels, your nice little hotels, because for real, like it's just not a good idea to go out on the street. But this is how we combat these kind of ideas by pushing back with better ideas. And I can only do that with access. So I'm not a big fan of Nick Fuentes. I've seen minutes, literally the amount of video that I've seen of him is maybe in the minutes. I don't even think I've seen a full hour of all of his content. Probably not even a half an hour. Probably only like 20, 25 minutes at most, if even that. But when I come across these ideas, I might want to comment on them. So let them come out. So I'm not a fan of him. I'm not a fan of Alex Jones. I have not been a fan of Alex Jones ever since what 2000, when he had that wild and bizarre Bohemian Grove, where he broke into Bohemian Grove and he videotaped, him breaking in. And I watched this video and I was like, this is a terrible video. Like he's trying to say all these things about Bohemian Grove, but none of them, like, there was no evidence for the things that he was saying. And it's funny because at the time, I happened to come across his video. I watched his video, and then the local radio station that I was listening to, a woman called in talking about how this guy, Alex Jones, and how we needed to go watch the Bohemian Grove. And I was like, oh, I just watched that like a week ago. And she started talking about how realistic it was, and all these things that he proved. And I was like, whoa, whoa, whoa. So I literally picked up the phone and I called into the radio station. I said, look, that isn't true, right? Like, I'll just give you one example. I don't have a clip to show you, so I apologize. But um, one of the one of the things was, as they were trying to break into Bohemian Grove, they apparently came across security in the woods, right? And they're videotaping, and he's narrating this video. So they videotaped it and then later narrated it. So he's narrating this video and he's like, this is where we were, and we ran into security. But you don't see any footage of security. And so then they just like cut the video, and he's like, and they go to something else. He's like, yeah, we had to cut the video for our safety, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, okay, well, right off the bat, you told me that you broke into this place. I see no signage that indicates that's where you really are. All I see is you traipsing around in the woods. And then you tell me that security confronted you and you somehow got past security, but without any cameras on or anything, like not even an audio recording, nothing. And so I'm like, there's nothing there to be believed. So I basically called in. I just kind of laid out that one and several other ones at the time. And, I just basically, and so the woman, or maybe it was a man, it might have been a man, but whoever it was, they were like, well, you should watch it anyway, just in case. And I'm like, just in case what? I already watched it. And the man couldn't even demonstrate that the things he was saying was true. He would just like point a camera and be like, over there, this thing happened. Okay, but do you have footage of this thing happening? No, you don't. So therefore, why would I believe you? That was all possible because I was able to access the video. Likewise, people should be allowed on X so that when they make content, people like me can have access to it. And then when somebody else is eating it up and saying, oh, yeah, you got to check out this guy, people like me can go, whoa, 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 hold up. I saw that. Here's where all the mistakes are. And here's why you shouldn't believe any of that. Right. Or maybe, maybe there'll be a case where somebody says, I don't believe this thing. I saw this video and I can say, well, I saw it. And here's why I believe what they're saying is true. So I agree with Zuby. We absolutely should allow people to be on X and to say some of the most vile things. And we can still mute people. We can still block people. Right? We don't have to listen to them. Right? That's I don't have to. I can just ignore it. And let's be honest. Some of y'all, the real problem is that you don't ignore stuff. It's not that somebody else is saying something. It's the fact that you can't help yourself and you can't stop, from giving it attention. So you need to learn a little bit of self-control. Like, hey, you know what? I'm done with this guy. This guy's a terrible person. I don't need to listen to him. Call it a day, move on. So there's no reason, to limit people from X unless they're making an actual threat. Like if Nick Fuentes or anybody gets online and says, I'm going to do this, or I want my followers to go do this thing, and it's an illegal action. It's something that may harm somebody. Then yeah, absolutely. I think that's a different story. But if they're just saying terrible things, like the example that Pierce Morgan, where he was like, I think whatever he said it was about all black people, and then point people to his show, yeah, that should absolutely be permitted so that others can dispute it. All right. So that's the Zuby thing. There was something else. You may be familiar with Lauren Chen, and this one is kind of interesting. So she's playing a video clip, and I'm going to pull this up as well. Give me a second. Let's pull this up and where we are. Okay, so we've got this, and then we've got this. Now I'm not going to play. I don't know if I'll play. I'm not. Let's see. Can't decide. So here's the original clip that Lauren is responding to. It's a libs of TikTok. It says graphic video game available on Steam. If you're not familiar, Steam is a gaming platform that you can go and download video games and play. And it says it's available on Steam, allows players to simulate being a Hamas terrorist. And they didn't even want to put the word terrorist who kills, and they like, this is weird. I don't even know why they're doing it. But Hamas terrorist who kills Jews in the old city of Jerusalem while shouting Allah Akbar. Dozens of comments supporting calling for the genocide of Jews. This is available for your kids to play. And then if I were to scroll down, you can see the video here. We'll just kind of play this. Yeah, I guess why not? So down a little bit here. All right, so the images are disturbing, so I apologize for that, folks. We know we try to keep it clean here on the Liberty Dad Show. All right, so this is a video game that's on Steam. All right. All right. All right, so standard shoot 'em up game, a little bit of blood and gore, standard thing, right? So then this is what Lauren Chen says. She says this, and then she's got a different clip. This is GTA 4 from 2008. Plenty of kids grew up playing edgy games like this, and they didn't turn into terrorists. I doubt, and notice that she doesn't obscure the word terrorist because, like, I don't know, that's weird. I doubt an obscure niche game on Steam is drawing the masses of kids away from Fortnite nowadays. And then here's the video that she's playing, and then we'll play that as well. So this is an old game from 2008, right? Same thing, same concept. All right. So what's going on here? Like, what's up with this whole video game? Well, it's nothing new. As Lauren Chen pointed out, the video clip that she showed is from 2008. Now, I want you to think about that. That's 15 years ago. Okay. 15 years ago, almost 16 years ago. Um, that's from a video game called Grand Theft Auto 4. And then I remember Grand Theft Auto 3, which was relatively similar. You could run people over, you could shoot them, and you could do all these kind of crazy things. But it goes even more than that. Like I played when I was younger, I played games like Hitman, and Hitman was a game where literally the object is to be an assassin. You are going around, and the gist of the game is that this organization raised kids from birth to be assassins. They don't have names; they only have numbers, and their number is tattooed on the back of their shaved head, and it's a barcode. I played that game when I was younger. Today, I dislike violence, like real violence. Like I don't mind violence in the movies, um, and, I turned out just fine. Now, maybe I'm the exception or maybe not, because a lot of people just like me played these video games and they were just fine. But I want to point out something else. So let me add this. Let me show this up on the screen here. So what we're looking at, I did a search in Google. I don't know if you know you could do this. So Lauren Chen's reference to 2008 gave me an idea. So I typed in violent video games. And then over here, well, you can't see it, but over to the right, I narrowed my focus, the search from January 1st of 2000 to December 31st of 2005. So I want to read you some of the results that we got back here and make sure that we're, visible on the screen here so that you can see it. All right, there we go. That's pretty good size. We can do that. All right, perfect. So what do we got? Violent video games can increase aggression. April 2000. And that comes from the American Psychological Association. American Academy of Family Physicians. Do video games lead to violent behavior in children? 2002. National Institute of Health. An update on the effects of playing violent video games. 2004. 2001. Also from the National Institutes of Health. Effects of violent video games on aggressive behavior. Science Direct. The effects of violent video games on adolescents. 2003. drdouglas.org from 2000. Where's this one? It doesn't have a date, but it says violent video games, the newest media violence hazard. By video games, violence and vulgarity, Lone Star College, 2005, so on and so forth. Just down the line. New York Times, the claim violent video games makes young people whatever, and that was 2005. So study and argue, like these things have been discussed forever. The idea that video games somehow lead to increased violence has been around forever. This is not a new thing. We may be more sensitive to it now because we watch nonstop media about school shootings, only specific ones, of course. We don't exactly watch, the school shootings that happened, like, say, when I was growing up. So I'm 45 now. And when I was in high school in the 90s, I actually went to a school that had a public high school that had metal detectors. Yeah, you might be surprised. If you're younger than, like, say, 30, maybe 35, that might surprise you. You might be surprised, like, wow, you really went to, and I didn't go to like some inner city school in, like LA or Chicago. I went to, just a regular public high school in Dayton, Ohio. And I don't believe that it would qualify for that inner city stuff, at least not what we see in the media. Maybe it is. I'm not really sure of the definition of inner city, but I went to a school that had metal detectors. I believe my cousin went to a school in Detroit and they weren't even allowed to wear their coats at a certain point because kids were hiding weapons in their big, huge coats because it gets really cold there. Like this is not a new idea that the environment leads to violence. Now, I do believe that certain environments do. If you live in an abusive home, then yes, I believe you are not want to say likely, but you are definitely more likely to become violent yourself than if you lived in a pleasant home, a non-violent home. But the idea that video games cause it is absurd because this has long been an argument that people make. And we're not really seeing any increase like you might expect because the video games out there, they're getting more graphic. And I know what I mean by more graphic. I mean the content, and I mean the quality. The quality is much better, so it seems more real. Like, I remember the days of 8-bit video games. A bunch of squares running around, jumping, doing the side scroller thing, and they weren't particularly violent back then. I mean, there was a few fighting games, um, but the quality was so poor that it wasn't like watching a movie. Speaking of movies, I grew up watching things like Rambo and other movies like that. You know, what was it? American Ninja, and other movies where there was a lot of violence. And sure, when I was a young lad, I wanted to be Rambo. In fact, might have even done a little pretend Rambo in the yard with my buddy. We we had one BB. I had a BB gun, and he would be on the. We had an extra lot that was next to my house, and he would stand on one side of the lot, behind the fence, peering over the fence, and then my job or my goal was to run from one point to the next point, basically across the yard, and try not to get hit with a BB gun. And he was basically Rambo, or I was Rambo. I can't remember who was who, but that was our version of Rambo, right? But again, we were playing. We weren't really trying to hurt each other. I mean, not more than young boys might do. I mean, certainly we wanted to, you know, hit each other with the BB gun and kind of have a little laugh and be like, I see the little bruise on you. But we weren't trying to harm them in any serious way. So, to the extent that film and movies and video games influenced any aggression, they did so only in the context of playing with friends. And I don't recall anybody who really tried to be Rambo in school, like really tried to go in and harm people. I don't recall anybody trying to harm people from some move or play hitman as I got a little bit older and played some of the some violent video games. That didn't happen. Why? Probably because it doesn't happen. Because if you're predisposed to violence for whatever reason, it's the cause is something else. And I would argue that the cause, more that we know for sure, is violent homes. But I think it can also be violent encounters with others. If you're picked on by other kids, you may end up growing up to be a little on the violent side. So I would agree with that. But that's an actual experience that you personally had to endure. Playing a video game isn't a personal experience that you endure. You don't feel the pain, the physical pain of the video game. So I'm unwilling to concede that this video game, any video game, is a cause for concern. Now, that doesn't mean that they're not appropriate for certain ages. My good buddy Steve, that I talk about all the time, he gave us his old PlayStation 3 and 2. He had two of them. So he gave us a 2 and a 3, and about 40 or 50 games. And unfortunately, there's about 5 that are suitable for my son. And those 5, there's 2 reasons. Number 1, most of the game well, this the number 1 reason is some of the games are just violent. Like Grand Theft Auto is one of the games that he gave. Hitman is another game. And I'm like, "Look, you're 4 years old." I'm not telling him, but I mean, he's 4 years old. And so therefore, Hitman is not an appropriate game for him, just because I want him to have a little bit more appreciation for to distinguish between television, what he sees on TV, and what happens in real life. And I'm going to get to that in a minute because it may sound like I'm contradicting myself, but I'm not. So I don't think some of those games are appropriate for him just based on the content. But then also the gameplay itself can be a little bit complicated because he's 4 and he doesn't quite understand how to use all the buttons. So the more buttons that are required to do something in a game, the more difficult it is for him and the less that he enjoys it. So I picked out the games that have that require fewer buttons to play the game and enjoy it, which also happens to be games where the content tends to be a bit more appropriate for him as well. Now, why would I prevent if I just said that video games don't lead to violence, then why not let my son play those games? It's not going to harm him or anyone else for that matter, right? Well, while I don't think that it'll cause him to be violent, I do believe that if you allow a kid too early to play with violence and to see violence, there is a possibility that they can become a little indifferent to violence that's happening to others. And I don't want that either. Now, there's a difference. The difference here is that on one hand, we're talking about, will a video game lead to one person being willing to engage in violence toward another unnecessarily? We're not talking about self defense. I don't agree. I think it won't. I believe that we have years and years and years and years of evidence to say otherwise. No matter how many times and how many articles, how many times we talk about it, no matter how many articles are published. On the other hand, I do think it can lead people to be a little bit more callous toward their fellow man when it's not happening to them. And so I want to make sure that he does not learn early on that violence is okay and it's a good thing, and to become indifferent when it's happening to somebody else. That I think would be bad in its own right, but it is distinguished from whether or not it would lead him to be specifically violent. So I think the answer here is simply for parents. If you're worried about video games, pay attention to what your child is consuming. My wife the other day was like, she was like, "Hey, you let him just watch YouTube, and you don't even, you don't even monitor it." And I said, "Actually, I do. I go through the history and I check and see what the history is. Or I usually do both of these actually. I check through the history to make sure I know what he's watching, make sure it's cool. And then I also, while he's there with me, I will periodically peer over and I'll be like, hey, what are you watching? And that way I know what he's consuming. And then when we got a bunch of video games, I pulled a bunch of video games. I said, all right, these games aren't for you. These are for big kids. You get to play them later. Here's the ones that you can play that are appropriate for you. It's as simple as that. We don't need to have any more fear mongering over video games and our children as the libs of TikTok did. That's just absurd. Video games and violence have been around for decades. It's not a big deal, folks. Just limit it like you would anything else. All right, let's see. What else do we got here? Yes. It's a good comment there, Keith. Let me put that up. Cowboys and Indians. Now you can say Indians on my show, folks, because I'm Native American and I say on this show, you can say Indians or Injuns if you want. But yes, before we had video games, kids played cowboys and Indians, right? We've played, boys play rough, they play violent, but their violence has a limit and it is intended to be fun. Sometimes they get carried away. That's what little kids do. And that's when an adult needs to step in and say, hey, Johnny, you're taking it too far. He said stop. You need to stop. Right? It's as simple as that. It's really not hard, folks. Easy stuff. So, all right. Last item. I think we got one more item on the list of things that I wanted to talk about today. And oh yeah, so this one is the dad gender reveal. Now, every so often I see a gender reveal video and like everybody flips out. They're like, I can't believe you did a gender reveal. Ah. And they're squawking for one or two reasons. Number one, they don't like the idea of two genders. So they're like, oh, how do you know that the child's gender, well, what it is when they haven't told you? Um, well, folks, we know that their gender is this, it is male or female, because in most cases, like what, the upper 90s percentile, the sex organs that people are born with match the gender that we believe is associated with those organs. That's how, right? Like statistically, if I said, oh, you have these parts, you're a girl. You have these parts, you're a boy. Statistically, I will be correct. Now, the other reason that people object to them is because they can kind of get dangerous. Like people let off fireworks and they burn down houses and they have all these weird. And I don't think that's a problem with the gender reveal. I think it's a problem with people not being careful with what they're friggin' doing. Because again, before we had all these crazy gender reveals, we had many other things that people did and they got themselves in trouble. I grew up when smoking was very common, and it was not uncommon to hear about a fire that started because somebody fell asleep while smoking a cigarette, and the cigarette fell down, caught the carpet on fire, and burned the house down. These were not uncommon stories. People do dumb things. So the idea is not to object necessarily to the thing, but to try to work with people and say, you need to be more wise in how you do these things. Have some concern for friggin' safety. All right. So, but I'm going to quibble with this particular gender reveal, and I think there's an honest criticism to be had. So let me pull this gender reveal up on the screen here. Let's see, where are we? So we're going to go down here, and where are you here? Ah, there it is. Almost thought I lost it. So this comes from Crazy Clips, and let's see here. We're going to pull this up on the screen, and we're going to see it. So we've got a dad, a mom, and two girls. And then I believe there's a little bit of profanity in this. So again, I apologize, folks. We do try to keep it clean, but sometimes it's unavoidable. So let's hear or let's watch this gender. And I don't know how old this is. It looks old because it's kind of grainy, but it could just be whatever.
What is it, Kaya? You having a baby brother or baby sister?
All right. All right. So I'm sure you can already guess. What is it that DL is going to quibble with here? Well, what I'm going to quibble with is I don't have an issue with a dad being kind of disappointed and looks like he's got two daughters and was excited to have a son. No issue there. I think that's fine. It's okay to be slightly disappointed in the moment when you find out you're having, a girl and you really wanted a boy, or you're having a boy and you really wanted a girl. I think a little moment of kind of disappointment, like it's okay because we're humans. And the reason that we're disappointed is because we have this vision of how things are going to play out. We want a boy, and we just imagine building him a go kart and taking him to the park and teaching him to ride a bicycle and climb up trees and chase alligators. Okay, maybe not chase alligators, but you get the point. Dads and moms, they kind of had this vision of how life is going to be with this new little one. And so when they find out it's going to be one of the opposite sex, then the dreams that they were having kind of get squashed a little bit. That doesn't mean they can't have new dreams. They can and they should. And what I'm going to quibble with here is not that he was disappointed, but that he made such a big outburst in front of his daughters. And I think the daughters probably will never remember this. They may see it now that it's on the internet and somebody from the family posted it, right? So, and now I've seen it and I don't even know who these people are. So these daughters may one day see this and they may feel a little bit of sadness, right? And like, oh, dad was disappointed. No, these daughters, but more importantly, the other daughter, right? The third daughter may see it and be like, oh, you didn't want me. Right. And so I think it's important for us dads. I'm going to speak to the dads out there. I think it's important for us to recognize that some behavior is not appropriate in front of our kids. Not because it's necessarily bad for us to the thoughts, right, in our head. We want to be careful the message that we send to our little ones because they don't always understand. They don't I understood. I'm 45. These kids look like they're 4. Right? And one day when his third daughter sees it, she may see it before she's 45, right? And so she might be like, "Well, daddy, you didn't want me." And that's not really it, I assume. It's possible, but I assume I'm going to go in good faith here and assume that all this is the dad expressing that man, he was excited to have a little boy. And unfortunately for him, he's going to have a little girl. So he doesn't get to do the things necessarily with the little boy that he thought he would do. Or, he can't do the things with the little girl that he was hoping to do with the little boy. Now he might. It's possible that any one of these three could grow up to be a tomboy, right? And so some of the fun boy things that a man would do with his son, it's still possible that he would get to do those things. Or it's possible that they're going to follow the more traditional girly things. And so all the boy things he doesn't get to do. So I get it. It's okay. And we shouldn't be mad at the dad. And I think some of the comments were pretty mean spirited about, I don't think people are really taking the fullness here. I do believe that this dad is happy to have a third child. I think he just had a little moment of, you know, darn it, I really wish I had a boy because I was looking forward to taking him fishing. And there's a good chance that my little girls are gonna be too squeamish and they're not gonna want to put the worm on the hook, you know, whatever. And it's possible they will, and he'll still have fun anyway. It's hard to say. They're young. Who knows? But I think it's okay to have these feelings. We need to be mindful how we behave in front of our family, right? It's you might remember the movie Saving Private Ryan. And there's a moment in there where Tom Hanks is I don't know that he says it, but the guys that are following Tom Hanks are trying to figure out why he's always so quiet. He never seems to complain. And then one of the soldiers tells the rest, they say, bitch up, not down. So what I see here is he's not really bitching up, if you will, or down, but he's bitching out loud. And so it can be perceived as bitching down because he's complaining in front of those who would follow him, his two daughters, and then his wife. His wife is laughing. So presumably she understands and she gets it. Presumably she knows where his heart really is. Because again, we're adults. Adults can do these things. We understand how to decipher human language or human behavior much better than children do. But that's the message that I would give is just to say, be mindful. When I'm working on a project and sometimes things go wrong, I just want to swear and cuss and carry on and maybe even throw something. But I try not to when my son's around. Because he doesn't understand, the context under which I'm doing it or the restraint that I may be showing, right? I may want to throw something through the window, but I may just toss it across the desk instead, right? So I'm restraining myself. And I do, and so I restrain myself when I'm in front of my son so that he understands, okay, this is how I should act until, well, I don't want to say so that he doesn't go beyond what I want him to, right? Because if he sees me throw something through the window, he's going to think it's okay to throw something through the window. This could become a problem very quickly. If he sees me just kind of get mad and toss something down, and he does it, it's not the end of the world, right? And even that, I probably don't want him to emulate, but he's going to emulate the things that I do. And so I want to make sure I give him a good impression. So that's all that I'm really saying. As dads, we want to make sure that we complain up, not down, and we set the best example that we can. We are humans. Our kids will see negative things from time to time. The less that they see and the more controlled, the less undoing we will have to do as parents as they get older, because they're going to mimic what we do. And if we do something insane and crazy, they're going to think insane and crazy that thing is acceptable. They may do it, and then good luck undoing it in their minds, right? We all know how that works. You drop the F bomb, your child picks it up. They say you make a big stink. They're like, oh, this must be funny because they're making a big stink about the F word. I'm just going to keep saying it. And then you have to work really hard to get them to stop saying the F word, right? Or whatever word. Same concept at play here. We want to make sure that our behaviors give them an example to follow. And when they see something that maybe we shouldn't have done, hopefully it's something that we can undo easily within our kids. All right, folks, that is my show for today. I want to thank you for watching. I hope that you found this episode informative and inspiring. Thank you for tuning in. If you're tuning in live this afternoon, thank you again. If you tuned in this morning and you heard my son crying in the background and I had to abruptly shut down the stream, it happens. But I appreciate anybody that watches that. I will be deleting that one once I finish up with this episode. So I'll be deleting the first one because there's no reason to keep a 13-minute episode where I abruptly quit. That seems absurd. So I will be deleting it. But thank you guys for being so patient. Be sure to catch me every morning, Monday through Friday, 7 a.m. Eastern, for an informed discussion on politics and culture. Then again on Sundays at 7 p.m. with my co host Susan Hogarth, where we discuss LP happenings. We look across the vastness of tyranny in this United States and we collect as many things as we can find that's of the happenings in the Libertarian Party and bringing it to you so that you can be inspired and you can be excited about what is going on. I want to make sure that you are subscribed to my YouTube channel and my Rumble channel. You can go to youtube.libertydad.com. You can go to rumble.libertydad.com. Make sure that you subscribe to my show and leave me a comment. Let me know how I'm doing. I'd love to hear from you. I do read the comments. Lastly, remember, if you are a champion of liberty, your business is people and your product is liberty. I want you to have a great week. Catch you tomorrow. But for now, I'm out.